Hi, my name is Sierra. I am 16 years old. I am still in high school, but I'm also in college and I'm taking like a few classes here. And I do on the online version of State Fair. But anyways, so the book I chose to do was Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And so I really like this book. I didn't really have like a specific reason for choosing it. It was like, okay, cool, like it sounds like a good book, like with all the like ethical things that are in it and like cultural bias. Like there's a lot of good things about it, and I'm like, that sounds really interesting to read. So I decided to read that book because of someone else recommending it to me. And then I also read the description on the back of the book. So this book kind of goes through like a series of like lessons. So there's the narrator, and then there's Ishmael, which is the gorilla, and so the narrator can like understand what Ishmael is saying just by like looking at him or looking in his eyes or whatever. Like he sent out a flyer saying for a teacher, but he wanted to teach somebody that there are two different groups within humanity. So like there's the takers and the leavers. There's the first lesson that is like when Ishmael like decides that he asked the narrator if he could describe or like explain the defining explanation of human nature or like of nature, but like didn't really know what to say, so then he kind of got a little bit frustrated there, but started the story about how humanity like came, like, and how it favors the human race, but it's like very unrealistic about it. So like it's very favoring to the human race. Ishmael, like, they started talking about the middle and the end of the story of humanity, and but it was in the way that the takers see the middle and the end of the beginning. So Ishmael starts like saying how that the taker culture was that they thought they had the right to dominate the world, and but Ishmael said that would lead to the end of humans and like the extinction of the human race. But so the humans tried to correct that by making more food and like creating more food. But then the more food and like stuff that they created, the more the population grew. So then it overcorrected and it balanced out. So then you weren't growing at all. But then he also used an example out of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, with Cain and Abel, and used them as the leavers and the takers. So the narrator had to leave for like a week. He didn't leave necessarily, but he was not there for like about a week. So, and when he came back, Ishmael wasn't in the same building he was at. And then they had a few more lessons in there about the same things, how the takers always went to the prophets for guidance, but the leavers were the ones that were the actual people that you would need to that you could follow and like how you should behave in like society, but the takers just like never paid attention to them. And then even after all those lessons, the narrator talked to the owner of the carnival. He asked to buy Ishmael, and the owner agreed, but then he went back to get out Ishmael, and Ishmael died of pneumonia. The favorite part of that book is that there's in the beginning of the story, there was this poster that he had seen when newspaper showing that there was a teacher available, which was Ishmael, and it said that with man gone will there be hope for gorilla. So that was at the very beginning of the book. And then at the very end of the book, after he was taking all the belongings of Ishmael, on the back of that poster it said, with gorilla gone will there be hope for man. And I found that really interesting just because of the differences, how there was differences in between there, and how they were similar but they were different. The impact of this book would be mainly about how the real story of the takers and leavers, and how a bunch of the stories that we've heard about history and how the human nature had started and all that stuff, it wasn't true, because a lot of it was geared more towards humans, and it really elevated the way humans were brought up, and shown that they were the greatest people. The takers were the people that always took everything, and they would get more than what they needed. They wouldn't do everything. They would just take what they would just keep taking. But the leavers would always be like example of society, and they would show how humanity is supposed to behave and how they're supposed to act, because they were the examples. And so it also shows like how like the real story behind like humanity, because it shows like a bunch of different cultural biases, and it shows how even though you're told all of these stories, it doesn't mean that they are true, because it can be biased based on your culture. But sometimes it's not even like, sometimes the history gets changed. Like so it's not like the actual like events and the thing that's changed, but it may be like small details. So that there was more to humanity than what was told in the stories, and that humans weren't as great and like, or they were not supposed to be evil. They're not evil. But they brought them up to be a lot better than what they are. So there's always a story to everything, and it just depends on, you have to find out what is the real story. And by learning all this stuff, that the narrator learned all of this stuff from Ishmael, from someone who which Ishmael knew all this stuff, and he's like experienced all that. Well, not necessarily experienced, but like, so he knew all of this stuff, and he was wanting to teach somebody the real truth behind everything. And so sometimes it's really great to have teachers like that will teach you all these things. And they like, overall, like the real like impact on me, at least, is that there's a lot more that I didn't know about the society that I thought I did because of all the stuff I've learned. But really, this book really brought up like a whole new perspective for me. It brought up like a different look at society, and like through a different like scope, which is really good in a book when you can I really like got into this book, and I read it like in one day, if that, and it was so interesting to me. But it really was about like how like finding the actual real truths that are happening, and like finding truths about humanity, or truths about whatever that you're looking for. So there was the most stuff that I especially learned was the differences between the takers and the leavers, and about how the takers were like, they would change the earth for their needs, and they would change it based on what they need. I said the same thing. But they would change everything by what they needed, according to Gallagher in 2020. She wrote this in September, and she like showed like, so it was showing the examples as well as what it said in the book. And they would just take what they need plus some. They would take what they needed, but they would just keep taking until there was nothing left, because they took everything that was like, they took everything for themselves, but they didn't really think about others. And which was all according to Gallagher in 2020, and also in 2020 Gallagher had said that as well, that they would disrupt the natural order, because they would, by like damming the rivers or cutting forest or doing anything that like destroys the natural like aspects of life, it just gets rid of everything that was natural in the society, and it just disrupts it. And then the leavers were, according to Gallagher 2020, they were the men or man before the agricultural revolution. So they were like the more like ideal like people. They were the examples, and they would want to be left alone. They would ask people to be left alone. They didn't really want to like, they were a lot different than the takers, and they didn't really like they didn't want to take other stuff from people, but they acted as their own self. They didn't like copy anybody. They just acted as their own person. And because they were the example of how to act or behave in the society, and they really established what humanity was supposed to be, or what humanity is like, the essence of what humanity was meant to be, and not to live selfishly. In conclusion, this was probably one of my favorite books that I have read in a long time. It's probably like at least in my top 2 or 5, but like probably my top 2, because I really like this book and I really like the perspective that it brought and all of the different like allusions and everything that were in the book. It was a really great book, and I would definitely recommend it to people that are like I would definitely recommend it to people that are interested in ethics or human nature, or the like background of human nature, anything that has to do with morals or values, ethics. Like, it's a really good book for that kind of thing, especially if it has to do with human nature. Overall, it's just a really great book too. I would recommend a lot of people read it just to get a new perspective on on life, and like what happened before you were alive. It's a really great book.